Before we had started with the teachers, what had happened was they went through the situation of picking a lesson. And there were 3 or 4 or 5 lessons that were sent to us in email to pick. And this one, the study of the book of Esther, is very interesting for this time. And I'm going to say this because it talks about God's people and what they went through, okay? We're in 2017. What do you think God's people are going to go through now? Do you already see what's happening to other people that follow other sect or religions that are being attacked? Our names have been mentioned in the news, okay, by a congressman talking about Adventists and Mormons, okay? So there are many, many things that are coming and transpiring around us. Now, does everyone, first of all, in here have the lesson? You need to get the lesson because we're going to go through this. Everyone, if you don't, raise your hand. If you don't have one, you have one on you. Someone over here, you might want to have this person over here to get a lesson or sign up for a lesson or borrow the lesson. But today we're going to talk in lesson 1, it's going to talk about the rich king, okay? It talks about the rich king. Now, students, we're going to have conversation back and forth. What do you think of when you hear the word king? What does that come to you? What does that mean when you talk about a king?
Ruler of a province, royalty.
Royalty, ruler, okay? Do we follow a king? Oh, we do? Okay, we do, or we try to. We try to also follow a king. What is his name? King Jesus, all right? But in this story, it's talking about Esther is talking about a rich king. Now, I want to go back a little bit, and there are questions in here that talk about the characteristic of the 4th king of Persia. But if students of prophecy, we talk about the image. I'm not going to draw. I would have my daughter come and draw, but I'm going to just write this in here. Okay? All right. So those of you, you know that when we talk about an image, that was the image of King Nebuchadnezzar. The first one was what? The head of what? Was what? What country? Okay. The chest and whatever was what? Medo-Persia. And the legs were what? The thighs were Greece. Okay. So now, when we're dealing with this story of Esther, there in the Bible there's 2 chapters. There's the chapter of Daniel, and there's the chapter of Esther. Now, I want to read to you, to give you a little background. This is out of the study Bible because it was very interesting in the reading of the book of Esther. So I want you to get a background of the title of the book of Esther. And I'm going to read this to you. It says, the book of Esther takes as its name that of the heroine of the story. Her original Hebrew name, and I'm going to put her name up here. This is her name, her original Hebrew name. Let me see if I spelled that correctly. All right. What is that name? Can you pronounce that? Had a what? Hadassah? Hadassah? We would call her Hadassah. So her Hebrew name was Hadassah. And this is what it means. It says it means myrtle. So students, I'm giving you a little history here and background to this whole story because this whole lesson is about Esther. So her name is Hadassah in Hebrew, and it means myrtle. Does anybody know what myrtle means or have a dictionary or something to look up what myrtle means? What is it? Is a myrtle a tree? Anybody have any Come on, y'all. Y'all have those phones? Come on, click some definition here. What do we have? What would you have as myrtle? Now, as you're looking for that, let me read on. It says, while Esther is probably a Persian name, that name in Persian, let me see if you know what that would mean. If you look up in the sky at night, what do you see? Star. Her name in Persian means star. Yes. Now, what is myrtle?
It is a tree. It's a widely cultivated as a ground cover for its dark green, shiny leaves, and usually blue or violet flowers.
Okay, read it one more time real slow. You said that it is a what? Cover of what?
A widely cultivated as a ground cover for its dark green, shiny leaves.
Okay, a ground cover. All right, let me put that in there. Okay, all right. Now, we looked at the name meaning star. Now, Mordecai, okay, who had adopted Hadassah, his cousin, as his daughter, may have given her the Persian name Esther at the time he charged her not to make her nationality known. Now, Hadassah was what?
Hebrew.
Hebrew, living in what time?
Median Persia.
In the Medo-Persia time, and also who had taken the Jews captive before?
Babylon.
Who? Babylon, right? They had taken the people captive. So, who taken Babylon captive? Medo and the Persians, okay? So now we're coming into this. I'm just showing you the time frame that we're in. We're not in Babylon, but we're now in the time frame of Medo-Persia, and we're dealing with Hadassah, Mordecai, and the story of the Jews because they have been taken captive. So now, if people are taken captive, what do you do with captives or slaves? I need mic. I'm not getting too much. People who can't hear on the yes. Green? Is it green?
You
Yeah.
imprison them.
Okay, they're in prison. But they're, what do you imprison them? Not imprisoned. They're not imprisoned. What are they? They're, yes.
Slaves.
In the back? He's waving.
In the case of Daniel, when the Hebrews were taken captive, they were actually servants in the courts of the kings. You'll notice that in Daniel chapter 1 that he took all of those that had ability to learn the language and do all these things. So what he did was he used them as servants. He took the best of the land, and what he left behind were the poor people and the ones that may not have made the cut according to his criteria. So when you look at the history of the Israelite nation, each time, you know, they were servants. It's not like they had the same rights as the native people that were there. You know, in Babylon, the 3 Hebrew worthies, they were servants. In Medo-Persia, you know, they were minorities in that place.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think I want to add off what Brother Arsenal said. One thing is that they were in bondage. And bondage not only of, you know, their work life, but their spiritual worship as well. They couldn't worship God fully how they really wanted to worship God. They could only do certain things and so forth.
Just one more thing regarding being around kings. It was often a custom of the kings if, you know, they took captives and the men were to be around the king's women, they would castrate the men. Mm-hmm. And so they were called eunuchs. Yes. And so the eunuchs, you know, I mean, that's a pretty severe thing to do when you think about it. That's, to me, that's like worse than slavery.
Yes. Okay. Did everybody understand that with the eunuchs? Okay. Now, let me read on here. It says, the book of Esther is a dramatic story of how God used a gorgeous young woman of surpassing beauty to save her people at a time of crisis. When extermination threatened them, as in the story of Ruth, we see the important role of women in God's great plan for the salvation of his people. Ruth was a Gentile who decided to identify herself with Israel and to accept their God as her God, while Esther was a Jewess who in God's providence became queen of the greatest nation of her time. She realized the truth and urgency of the question addressed to her by her foster father. Okay? Now, I'm going to stop there, but let me just say this. Let's talk about the king. Now, this is the historical setting. We're going to talk about the king. And at the death of Darius the first in 486 BC, his son Xerxes ascended the throne and ruled it until his death in 465 BC, and was in turn succeeded by his son Artaxerxes. The Ahasuerus of the Bible is thus Xerxes of history. Now, this rich king that we're talking about, ruler, what is his name? All right, so I'm going to put his name up here because this is the story of today. And as you see, Brother Hall has the book, the Bible, right in front of him to make sure I spell this right, because this is a Persian name. Ahasuerus, right? And in history, if you read history books, they usually, the Greek name is Xerxes, okay? But the Persian name is Ahasuerus. That's why you're going back and forth and hearing this name here, but these are the same person, and in history we try to make it together. So that's what I'm trying to say. We have to understand Babylon, Medes and Persia, and then also Greece. So we have these different names coming up. The name Ahasuerus is from the Latin transliteration of, and I'm just going to try and pronounce this, Ahasuerus, the Hebrew equivalent of the Babylonian, and I can't even pronounce that name, but it's Ashurasbu. The translators of confuse Ahasuerus with Artaxerxes. So they're saying there was something with the historical setting, they confused those two together, but they were two different. Ahasuerus and then Artaxerxes, okay? The Ahasuerus of the books of Ezra and Esther is not the Ahasuerus of Daniel 9:1, who was the father of Darius the Mede. So I'm just giving you all this little history that we're going through. I won't go into any more of it. There's so much more in there of the history. But I just wanted to point those things out, the names, where they come from, what they mean, and what is going on. Now, let us now look into our first question, okay? And in our first question, it is talking about the characteristic of the fourth king of Persia, okay? So now, a microphone in the back. We're going into the book of Daniel.
Daniel chapter 11 and verse 2. And it reads, "And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia."
Okay.
So the characteristic of this particular king is that he would be far richer than all of them, I guess the ones that preceded him.
Right.
You know, as we were studying last night, I had the kids I was drilling them on the history of the nations, and we did the same thing you did, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, and we studied it with Daniel chapter 2. But when you look at that, it says he would stir up the Grecians, and we know that the Grecians, they were the nation to supersede them after that fact.
Right. So in other words, as these nations are going against nations, like for instance, I'm Babylon, I conquer all in the vicinity, so I am the ruler. But there's another one that's greater than you that comes over here, which is Medes and Persians. They now come over and take the region of Babylon and take over. Now, I just want to tell you how big the Medes and Persians, this king here, how big his territory was. It was from Ethiopia to India. Okay, now some of you have the globe in your head, and some of you are like, Brother Hall, I don't know how big that is or whatever. It's like 3,000 miles. So that's like from California to one of my favorite states. Which one is that? New York. Okay? So that shows how big an area that this king had. Yes, please, questions. Microphone.
No, I just remember reading 127 providences.
We're coming to that. Yeah. Those provinces, okay, they're very big. So now, he read Daniel 11:2. So now he is not only the rich king, but he is what king? In the Bible of Daniel 11:2, what does it talk about? He is the what? The fourth king. Okay? Now, by what name is he known in history? Somebody, I want you to read note 1.
Note 1. The visions of the 10th and 11th chapters of Daniel were given in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Daniel 10:1. Therefore, when Gabriel said, "There shall stand up yet 3 kings of Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all," he referred to those that follow Cyrus, namely Cambyses, Smerdis, the impostor, Darius, Hastapses, and Xerxes the Great.
Okay, remember before I read in the historical setting that Darius the Mede was the father of Xerxes the Great, or was Asharias. Okay, so now we all have that. We all have the picture now, because this is the beginning of history, and we're getting the whole picture of this king, the 4th king, being Asharias, okay, known as Xerxes the Great. Now, before some of you had something to say? Yes, please.
As I think for me, as we were reading this, and it says, "And he will now show thee, behold, there shall stand 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be richer than them all." And just looking at that verse, it takes me to something dealing with modern day time. If we look at all our presidents, Donald Trump is the most richest president we ever had of all the presidents. And this king at this time, if I'm correct, he married a Hebrew woman, right? Correct, right? Esther. And if we really look at it, Donald Trump is really one of the first presidents to have any kind of real relationship with Seventh-day Adventists. And with, what is the? Ben Carson. So it's very interesting how you see this at the time. And this king was the one that set the law in place for prosecution of the Jews.
Very interesting. Yes. Very interesting that you mentioned that. Just remember, things that happened in the past do come back again in our time. I won't go into, I was telling someone earlier a story about Gideon, but I'll go into that later on. I won't go into that now. Okay, so let's go back to note number 1, to question number 2, and it talks about Xerxes the Great. Now, did you also catch when something is said biblically, what is it telling you that's going to happen? What do we call it? Prophecy. Okay? So it was prophesied, or prophecy was given, talking about this 4th king, which is Azarias. Now, let's go into the third question. It says, somebody read it. I don't want to, go ahead, please.
Give the Bible name of this king and the extent of his kingdom. Esther 1, 1 and 2.
Okay.
Now it came to pass in the day of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces.
Okay, stop right there. All of you said that, I've said that. From where?
India
to where?
Ethiopia,
And how many provinces?
120 provinces.
127 provinces. Now, you know back then, those provinces they're huge. Remember what I said, that's 3,000 miles from California to New York, that range of space. Read the second verse. Yes.
And in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace.
Okay, so now we're talking about, where did he live? Somebody spell it for me. S-U what? Say it again in the mic.
S-H-U-S.
S-H.
H-U-S.
Hold on, let me get this. Okay, S-H-U-S.
H-A-N.
H-A-N. And I think the town, or the name of the city was Susa. Okay? So it's called the city of Shushan. So this is where the palace was. Now, let's look at note number 2. Okay, and let's take our time going through this note because it gives a lot of information about Azarias, Xerxes, and they're going to talk about the proof. So who's going to read that note for us? Okay, go ahead.
That Ahasuerus is Xerxes, there is sufficient proof. The two names are identical, the latter being but the Greek form of the Persian name. Second, the characters of the two men are alike. Both were impulsive and impassionate.
Okay, stop right there. Now, do you understand why they're talking about the difference with these two names? Because historians or whatever is trying to make him look like they're separate. They're not the same. But we as God's people, we're spiritual. We're putting it together as that this is the same because these two people have certain character and they act alike when you go into historical reference of what they did. Go ahead, please.
When Xerxes invaded Greece, he scourged the sea for breaking his bridge and put to death the engineers because their work did not stand the storm.
All right, stop right there, okay? Now, this King Xerxes, was he a nice person? If you didn't do what you're asked to do correctly, what did he do with you?
Put you to death.
Okay, this bridge that was built did not take the storm or whatever from the sea. What did he do with them?
Had them put to death.
Put them to death, okay? So this king does not tolerate failure at all, okay? And how he deals with failure. That's why we're talking about this rich king, how he acts and how he deals with failure. Now, read on.
In a similarly impulsive manner, Ahasuerus repudiated his queen, Vashti, because she would not violate the decorum of her sex, and ordered the massacre of the whole Jewish people to gratify the malice of Haman.
Okay, stop right there. Now, that's kind of the whole story of everything. But Vashti, who was Vashti now?
The queen.
Vashti was what? Queen of what?
Persia.
Queen of what?
Persia.
Queen of Persia. Okay, that was Azarias' queen. And then also the other thing, talk about the massacre of the whole Jewish nation. Now, read on.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Xerxes was held an assembly to arrange the Grecian war. In the 3rd year of the reign of Ahasuerus was held a great feast and assembly in Shushan the palace. In the 7th year of his reign, Xerxes returned defeated from Greece and consoled himself by the pleasures of the harem. In the 7th year of his reign, fair young maidens were sought for Ahasuerus, and he replaced Vashti by marrying Esther. The tribute he laid upon the land and upon the isles of the sea may well have been the result of the expenditure and ruin of the Grecian expedition.
Okay, very good. Now, does everybody get this picture? Go ahead.
I noticed kind of a little bit different, but I remember when I was growing up, when I was growing up and before I became an Adventist, it was a movie called 300. And in the movie 300, it had a king named Xerxes, and he ruled. He had slaves, and he came to fight the Grecian warriors, and he killed them off. And then I guess they came back and joined together to defeat him. But if that's the same Xerxes, that was a evil, evil, evil king.
Yes, yes, it is. Now, this is the, remember, if you own something, you want to go and conquer more. Because the more you conquer, isn't it the richer you become? Yes, in the back. In the back.
I just wanted to point out something. When you look at the history of the nations, we know Babylon, according to Jeremiah, was a golden kingdom.
Yes.
In Babylon, what they controlled, once Medo-Persia took over, they took over everything that Babylon used to control. So as we see the secession of nations, you'll see that the wealth of the nation, as they succeed the previous one, goes way up.
Right. So the rich king, who was he going after now? He was going after Greece, right? Now, was Greece something to reckon with? Look how many years. It was the 3rd year. He came back in the what year? The 7th year in defeat. So how many years was he out there trying to take over Greece? How many years? 4 years of war, okay? And what you saw was one of the stories of the 300, I forget the name of what they called themselves.
Spartans.
Spartans, yes. That was an elite group in the Greek army, the Spartans. And so they were attacking Greece. All right, now, let's go back to our other question. We read the note. Now we're going to go to question number 4. It says, what council did he call? For what object? And how long did it continue? Now somebody needs to read Esther, and we're going into verses 4 and 5. Esther, verses 4 and 5.
When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace.
Okay, in verse 4, what was that going on there? Who would he bring to his own court? What type of people would be invited to come to this occasion? I can't hear you.
The rich people, the kings, the prince.
Ah, the who now?
The kings and the prince.
Well, he's the king.
But other
and
kings.
And there's none other.
Well,
So
the princes.
the princes.
And
Okay. How many provinces did he have? 100 and what? 127. Let me write this here so we won't forget. Okay? So he would have at least 127 princes coming to this. Now, when these people, when they get together and have a function, for how many days was it? 100 and what? 80. So what is a score? 20. A score is 20, right? So 80 would be what? 80. So for 180 days, they're doing what? Yes.
So for 180 days, it's like he was showing the glories of his kingdom and his wealth and all that type of stuff.
100. How much? How much? We get interference. I don't know what. Okay. How could any of you do that for 180 days?
It's a half a year.
And trust me, he was feeding them and they were drinking, okay, and parading around. So how much wealth do you think this king had to do that for 180 days? Then, after that, what did he do in verse 5? He did what? What did he do? What you read? That was 180 days with the princes and everyone. Then after that, what did he do in the next verse?
And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in the Shushan of the that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the courts of the garden of the king's palace.
So we know Shushan, the palace must have been huge. The people, great and small, everybody in Susa, they were all there for 7 days. And he's now taking it to the people. Isn't this a nice king to share with the people? Okay, go ahead.
And I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Don't jump too far ahead.
Yeah.
We're going steadily with the king.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
But I'm just looking at it in a way of prophecy.
Yes.
And Brother Arsenal said earlier that Babylon was Medo-Persia took over Babylon, so they took over those lands. And then Medo-Persia was taken over by Greece, so they took over those lands. And we know in the study, the last is Rome. So if Rome took over all those lands, and then after Rome is the papacy, that means the papacy owns the whole world undercover. And when we see these presidents, which is just modern day kings and rulers all coming together to make feast, and I think one key thing was, and I'm pretty sure that in God's word, everything is there for detail when he did these things. It said 180 days they made feast. So 180 days is half of the year. That's because it's 360 days in a year. But if it was 180 days they made feast, that means in our terms, or a spiritual thing, feast can be false worship. It can be false worship. The papacy, in a sense, can be bringing kings together to teach them a false worship through a whole time throughout the year, and then at a certain time to hit a certain law into place. So what I'm trying to say is that, and they did it in a way of eating and drinking, but when they were eating and drinking, they were eating to their gods. They weren't just eating and drinking, they were saying this into this God and this into this God. And that's the same thing that is happening now. The papacy is on a march, bringing all the world kings together to make false worship, eating to a false religion.
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, they've the last 2 weeks, they have been going to different sects of different countries, to different prelates, high ministers in those areas, and they have been talking and negotiating all these things coming together. And 2 years ago here in America, a lot of the Protestants, they all were on the internet or whatever, on the cable view or Skyping with each other, talking about, we now pay homage to the Pope. So yes, we do see all of these things happening right before our eyes, and this story is the same way. Let's move on to where it says, we went through how long it continued, the council he called, and what was the object. Now, question number 5. Let's go into question number 5. Anyone? Question 5.
Question 5. State some of the ways in which the king displayed his great wealth. Verses 6 and 7. where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble, and they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king.
Okay, now this is really deep. These huge, they call them beds. There's a text here. Let's turn to Ezekiel. Someone turn to Ezekiel 23:41. Ezekiel 23:41. Anyone has it?
What is that word?
Ezekiel 23:41.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And sattest upon a stately bed, and a table prepared before it, whereupon thou hast set mine incense and mine oil.
Okay, so this is, it talks about, and sattest upon a stately bed. And this is talk about very honorable. Only certain people can stay on there. I had something, I'm looking for it. It gave a description of what it was like. I'm trying to find in here those beds, what was on there. All right, we'll move on. But in other words, this was a very great, they were actually like beds or couches. That's what they were, but you saw what they were made out of, all of that material.
Note 3 says the beds were referred to
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. read
were
note three.
doubtless the couches upon which, according to Oriental fashion, they reclined while feasting. The drinking cups were of gold, although thousands were given wine. Every cup was different in design.
Okay, there it is. It's in note 3. All right. Every cup was different, made out of gold. It was not the same. There were thousands of people there. Can you imagine the artistry and the person that went and made those gold cups, and each one was different and not the same? How rich this person was. Let's move on. Let's move on. It says, what consideration was shown in the serving of wine? Verse 8. Somebody read that.
And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, that they should do according to every man's pleasure.
What did that mean? What does that mean? Huh? Unlimited. Whatever you want, there's plenty. Drink on. Man, this is great riches. Go ahead, quickly.
I think that I was looking at note 3 when you says, and the drinking cups were gold, throughout thousands were given wine. Every cup was different in design.
Right.
So, like I said, I keep thinking about the spiritual aspect of it. What does wine represent? Doctrine. With doctrine, so as the papacy is going, they're making all these agreements together and this is what the devil does. This is the devil's work, because he doesn't hit none of us the same.
No.
He designs it all differently. All differently, but it's all false doctrine.
Right.
To get us all drunk and weary that we cannot see, we cannot hear, and we cannot understand what's going on.
Right. Amen. So true. Okay, now let's look on into the next question. What consideration, where are we? 6. What consideration was shown in serving the wine? We read that. Let's move on to 7. How were the women entertained? Now, this is the part that I really like this. Now, did you guys catch this? All of this stuff going on in the palace with the king at Shushan, Was women there? No, there wasn't, was there? This is all men carrying on with this nonsense, okay? So let's find out, what were the women doing? And who was the leader of the women? Yes, ma'am.
Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus.
Okay, so they were in another place known as the royal house. So when the princes all come and bring their wives or whatever, all of the ladies went together and were in the royal house. So now, they were entertained at the royal house. Now, let's look at question number 8. It starts now with verses 10 and 11. But the question is, what unreasonable command was given by the king? What command was given by the king? Someone read those texts.
On
On
the
the-
se- oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay. On
Verse-
the 10 and 11?
10 and 11.
On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on.
Yes.
You know, this is the part that I didn't realize. At first, I thought Vashti was being stubborn, and I
Yes.
thought she was hard-headed,
Yes.
and that's what I was thinking about. And then I was like, wait a minute. When you look at Middle Eastern women today, let alone thousands of years ago, what do you notice about Middle Eastern women? They're clothed.
Clothed.
So for Vashti to not display herself and parade herself in front of the king, she didn't want to be in front of all those men.
Thousands.
Exactly. And I just thought about that. I said, oh, so that's what, it's funny. I just learned that last night. I never thought about it
It gets
in
deep.
that particular light. I just thought she was stubborn and hard-headed. I'm like, what's wrong with this
Yeah,
woman?
I'm not coming. I don't want to do
Yeah,
that.
this is the king. I was like, wait a minute. But when you look at the custom of Middle Eastern women, they don't do that type of stuff.
Yes.
And
Also-
to me, that was really deep.
Also, Vashti was she was a godly woman. She wasn't a woman of display. She dressed modestly. She also knew that all these men in here were drunk. Can you imagine if she came in any kind of way, at the king's command? She could have been raped. Anything could have happened to her. And she, out of wisdom, did not do that,
All right, let me read this part in here of the study Bible to you that feeds into what you said. Let me read this quickly. The contrast of the two feasts, okay? We read with pleasure of the feast of the Queen Vashti. This was not a feast attended by a promiscuous number, but a feast given by the queen for the women of rank in the kingdom, who were entertained with modest courtesy, without wantingness or sensuality. It was when the king was not himself, when his reason was dethroned by wine drinking, that he sent for the queen, that those present at his feast, men besotted by wine, might gaze upon her beauty. She acted in harmony with a pure conscience. Vashti refused to obey the king's command, thinking that when he came to himself, he would commend her course of action. But the king had, and listen to this, he had unwise advisors. Okay? They argued it would be a power given to women that would be to her injury. Okay? So in other words, in this court, you're always going to have the unwise, or those that are not following what is to be, but they're looking at it a whole nother way, like, oh no, this woman's going to tell you what? No. King, that cannot happen. And this is where one of the princes or whatever got up and made gesture further on in the text. Yes?
I was about to say there's a history of wicked advisors in the Bible.
Yes.
When you look at Solomon's son's advisors, the older men said, look, if you just take it easy on them, they'll serve you forever. But he chose wicked advisors. He chose the younger men, and the younger men of the kingdom told him, oh no, you gotta increase the taxes so you could live more luxuriously. So that was an example of a wicked advisor. Also, in the time of Daniel, there were advisors to the king that the king would make a law that nobody could worship any other god except for the king. So that's another example of wickedness when it comes to the politics of the day. But what my aunt just said about Vashti, what I got from reading those texts, I have never in my life seen it that way. She was a virtuous woman. She would not parade herself for a bunch of drunk men. And so we even have an example. To me, that's an example. We should not follow unrighteous decrees whatsoever. Because unrighteous decrees, we have a duty to turn them down.
Yes.
I think, like I said, for me, it's been grasped me in the prophecy and the parable sense of it, that if we look at Vashti, if she was a modest woman, what does woman represent? It represents the church. Right. And then if you look at vice versa, if this was the king that did a decree and he had all the councilmen, what did he do? The wine of what? The wine of Babylon. Right. So when these men were drunken with false doctrine, who did they try to go after? The church. Wow. They try to go after the church of God. Right. And then the church of God said what? No, I won't stand for that, because I will not be what? Be naked and be defiled with your sins. And then what was happened to the church of God? They were what? Prosecuted.
Very good. Listen, I get hyped up in this lesson, man. I'm telling you right now. I would say, like, Esther, okay, there is so much. I only did 10 questions, and man, this is really deep. This is what is coming to us as God's people. Let me read the back. Look on the back. I want those of you that are listening on the internet, I'm going to just read this summation on the back just to let you know, to close out. Our time is gone. On the day appointed for their destruction, the Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Azarias to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all the people. Esther 9:2. It says, God has commissioned angels to protect his people while they are gathered to defend their lives. And that is in verse 16. The experiences that came to God's people in Esther's day were not unique to that age. John the Revelator looked down the ages, declared, as you say, brother over there, the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, in Revelation 12:17. Some today will see these words fulfilled. The spirit that led people long ago to persecute the true church will lead to similar efforts against those who maintain their loyalty to God. Even now, preparations for this last conflict, they are underway. The final decree against God's remnant people will be similar to the one as Ahasuerus issued against the Jews. In the little company keeping the Sabbath commandment, the enemies of the true church see a Mordecai at the gate. God's people reverence his law, and this is a constant rebuke to those who have cast off the fear of the Lord and are trembling on his Sabbath. In closing, this is what I want to leave you with. May God be with all of you for the lesson of today. And now I would like to close with prayer. Let us bow our heads. Kind Father, we thank you for our lesson today, dear Lord. We ask that we as your remnant people, that we fortify our minds in doing your will and standing up for you, dear Father, and studying your word, dear Lord. So please be with all of us, those that are watching, dear Lord, that we share the gospel, the three angels' message, to let the people know and to warn them of what is upon us now in this day and age. Be with us, I pray, in the loving name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.